Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this County Council's Emergency Committee. And as you can tell, because you got your minutes a week ago, this isn't actually an emergency, but I thought it was a good idea to have a meeting, so if and when, God forbid, we ever do have an emergency, the committee knows exactly what it's doing, where it meets, and Helen will go through all this, what triggers it, and what our roles are, how we communicate with people, rather than just actually having an emergency and us not absolutely sure what we're doing. So, through formalities first. We've got the membership there. Terms of reference, do we agree to terms of reference? Agreed. Thank you. Apologies for absence. We've got Councillor Flux, Councillor Dickinson and Councillor Wearmouth. There are the apologies. Disclosure of members' interests. Shouldn't be any, right, okay. So, we've got the Storm Arwen Community Resilience Update Report. And when you go through this, Helen, can you just sort of like bring in some of the things I've mentioned, like the triggers, you know, who triggers an emergency getting together and who might be involved, which officers, if we meet here, if we meet at West Hertford, if there's a localised issue, say, flooding in Hexham or Morpeth, do we meet on, on site? So, yeah, so I'll turn that over to you now.
Thank you. Do I need to press a button? Yes. Thank you very much, Chair. And just for those of you that don't know me, I'm Helen Hines. I'm the Business Resilience and Emergency Planning Lead for Northumberland County Council. I think I've met most people in the room. I've been in post about 13 months now, so this is the first meeting of the County's Emergency Committee that I've attended. We took a report to the Communities in Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee at the beginning of October, where we were talking about the community resilience work we've been doing as a result of Storm Arwen and the work that was in there. So you will have received the report, but it's just worth noting that since that report was written, the work has continued, and we have done a number of other meetings with communities. We continue to work with Northern Power Grid, particularly around the resilient grant that they've made available for communities, concentrating mainly on energy resilience and identifying buildings within communities that can be used as community hubs in the event of an emergency. I found out just the other day that apparently Northumberland is winning the league table of areas that are bidding into that money. So I'm aware of about 26 bids so far in various areas of the county. That's in the process of a soft launch with Northern Power Grid, and they made available to the areas that were most badly affected by Storm Arwen. So for us, that was particularly the north and the west of the county, and communities have responded well to that. We've been working with various communities to help them develop their bids, but also to think about how they can be more resilient in the run-up to the winter. And as part of that, our communications team are going to be running an article in the next version of the Residents magazine, which I believe is early next month, which has got preparedness advice in for our residents as well. Just some simple things like make sure you've got a torch, make sure you've got access to a radio, hopefully a battery-operated radio or a wind-up radio if you can source one of those. Just some really practical examples about how we can keep people up to date with what's going on. We have also we've been working with parish councils directly and helping them develop their plans. We held a community exercise in Rothbury in October. We're going to be holding a workshop in the West next week. We're constantly getting requests from parish councils to work with those. And we're working in partnership with Northumberland communities together as well to make sure that we're working with our communities as closely as possible. But we also want to make it clear that we're not just delegating all the responsibilities to communities. What we're trying to do is help them and assist them to fill that gap before we or other emergency services can get to a response. We were going to do some work, particularly on comms, during September. Unfortunately, some of the work that we planned in September was suspended because of the passing of Her Majesty. So that was deferred into October. And I need to speak to comms to find out just how successful some of that work was, because it was a social media campaign to try and promote some preparedness messages as well. We do have an ongoing issue as we go into winter, which is around resilient telecoms. But I know that through the lobbying of some of our MPs that British Telecom have suspended taking out the copper lines into some of our rural communities. But we do have some areas of our rural communities that have got digital lines. But our MPs are continuing to lobby on that issue, and we're trying to get more information and look at some solutions to resilient comms as we move into the winter. We do have particular issues around the resilience of our mobile network, and our emergency services experience some problems there as well. We've been working with both Guy Opperman's office and Anne-Marie Trevelyan's office, and we have attended 4 community meetings that they've organised, 2 in the west, 2 in the north, both very well attended by community groups. And we also organised a community event at Newbiggin, which we organised with Northumberland Communities Together and other partners, which was very well attended, and it was attended by groups and parish councils who we haven't had the chance to talk to. So it was some of our town councils were in attendance there as well. So it was really good to speak to different groups. And we continue to work with Northumberland Communities Together and Community Action Northumberland to make sure that we're linking up the community resilience work with the warm places and spaces work and with the warm hub work that can lead on as well. So there's lots of activity going on. Northern Power Grid were given a number of actions that they had to follow through on by the regulator. And they had 14 work streams that they were delivering on as well. So I need to get more information from them about exactly how that's been resolved before we go into winter. But they do sit on the local resilience forum, so we do talk to them regularly about the work that they are doing. And we also work with Scottish Power Energy Networks as well. Obviously they cover the North Patch, and we've been working with Northumbrian Water as well. So we have been working with other utility companies, not just at Northern Power Grid. I think that's probably all I intend to say about the report.
Ask Ellen, on the key issues on page 1 on the report, it says on paragraph C, the County Emergency Committee to test and review the Community Resilience Project annually. How are we going to do that, and when are we going to do that?
Well, I think this is the first meeting to do that, so I think we can say we've done that for this year, and we need to, I would suggest, have a pre-winter meeting every year to make sure that we are happy about the arrangements or content about the arrangements that we have as an organisation before we move into winter. So I would suggest, Chair, that we have an annual meeting similar time next year, maybe slightly earlier. And we can review where we've got to and how well prepared we are before we go into winter.
Okay. Could I ask Councillor Sanderson, Glenn, you hold the parish and town councils in great esteem, and you've set meetings up. Are we in any way going to have any sort of extra meetings with them? Helen's mentioned the projects they're having with them. Is there anything new on the horizon? Because we have got meetings organised with them in January. Would this be part of the agenda or something separate?
We do have 3 conferences set up with parish and town councils. So we'll have the North, the Central and the South. And those dates are in early January. And it would be very good if we just had if Helen could come along to those and just do a bite-size part of that. We're trying, basically what it's about is to talk to parish and town councils about the budget, to talk to them about our corporate plan, and then to have a one-to-one with the key officers that they deal with, so they can actually meet up with officers and discuss issues one-to-one, and then we'll also be using the opportunity to touch on one or two other things, and so I think this would be a very good addition to that. So if Helen wants to drop me a line, I'll put her in touch with the officer that's organising those.
Thanks, Glenn. Right, over to the committee. Would anybody, Stephen, I'm sure you would like to make some comment on this Arwen report, so
Yeah.
over to you.
If I may, one of the things, and I briefly mentioned it to you earlier, Chair, and I know Glenn's aware because I've copied him in the emails as well. Helen's kind of alluded to it. The biggest issue for us, and I'm saying the Rothbury area, but it is rural Northumberland, is the resilience of the mobile infrastructure. And as Helen knows, we've had a bit of a victory recently on that with a new mast that Virgin O2 wanted to put into the Rothbury area. And Chair, you will know this better than anyone because you've constantly said planning comes down to policy. But I want to specifically say thank you to Helen on this one, because Helen actually responded to the application in her capacity, but to Rob Murphy and his team as well, because they really did pull the cat out of the bag on this one. The mobile company wanted to build a new mast in the Rothbury area. They did not want to build any backup generation to that mast, which would mean in the event of a power cut, the mast absolutely useless, because I think the backup battery on it lasts 8 hours at most, sometimes not even that. And they've really done well, and Rob has indicated as long as it is obviously in line with planning policy, their kind of default position is going to be on new mast applications in rural areas to try and negotiate to get backup generation, which I think is a good thing for the council. And if I'm honest with you, I think it's a good. Glenn and you should be in the press shouting about it, because it's a great thing for rural Northumberland if that's the route that the plan. I've raised it with Anne Marie's office because I spoke to Tom last week about it as well, because it does need a change in national legislation as well, because the mobile telecoms companies have very different planning policies. It's a bit more lax for them, and to be fair, it should be, because we want more masts, we want people to be able to communicate, but they've got to be prepared in rural areas to put that backup generation in the event of an emergency. So anything Rob and his team can do from a planning perspective, as long as it's in line with policy, and if their default position is going to be to attempt to get that backup generation on other masts as well, the same as what they've done in Rothbury, I think that's a win for the council, and you should be proud of it, and it's a good start.
Stephen, well, I have regular meetings with Rob, and I'll take this up with him to see, to follow up your points. But on the point of the mobile masts, the one you're talking about, the new one that's going to happen, I don't know if it's been erected yet. The problem we had during the storm was the masts were okay, but there was no generators for them. And the biggest problem we had, which is why the residents of Northumberland, all of Northumberland, were kept in the dark, so to speak, from communications. They had no idea when the electric was going to come back on, if it was going to come back on that day, that week. In my area, electric was off for 12 days. I think Glenn, who lives closer to civilization, I think his electric was off just as long. And the problem for the members of the public was a lack of information coming out. So I believe, Helen, that there was going to have people have vehicles, so that they've got radios. In an emergency, Radio Newcastle, would that be used for getting information out better this time?
Yeah, our comms team were due to speak to BBC Radio Newcastle about their connecting in a crisis work that it's historically a role that BBC local radios have had. Unfortunately, that meeting was due to take place at the time of the Queen's death, so I don't know whether they've actually been able to rearrange that meeting. I also don't know what impact some of the changes to BBC local radio might have in an emergency. But of course, we don't just have BBC local radio, we do have other local radio stations that we should also be working with as well. But yes, there are excellent examples of how BBC local radio assist communities in a crisis in other parts of the country. I think of Cumbria and I think it's Lincolnshire as well. So if we can work with them to develop a similar kind of relationship. MPG are reporting that they have got that agreement with BBC Radio Newcastle, but of course it's not just about power cuts. We should also be thinking about this for use in any emergency. Yeah.
Sorry, before I bring Alan in, that was probably, apart from the discomfort of being in the cold and dark, that was probably the next more serious thing, the fact that the lack of information when people had no idea. And although I don't want to use this committee as an instrument to knock organisations, but Northern Power Grid were not very good at communicating with people, and they were, I believe they were, in a lot of instances, people got false information saying the electric will be back on this afternoon when it was going to be back on for a week. So what we need is correct information coming out. So, and that's what this committee is about, to try and communicate with the public. So, Alan.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Chairman, on this. I mean, at Hayden Bridge, when they were off for a week, I mean, I acknowledge that maybe it wasn't as bad in Allen Heads, but I mean, well, about 40 or 50 people off in Hayden Bridge. And the biggest problem is, as you say, is communication. Now, in a lot of them cases, it was 4 or 5 days before some of the county council staffs knocked on doors, because obviously people needed help with finances and all the rest of it. Once we got that in place, I would like to think that if electric was off in a lot of places, that a lot of our communities team can get round some of the areas a lot quicker, or at least deal direct with the councillors, so we know actually what's happened, so we can report things back to the parish councils. Because in some ways, you know, the parish councillors didn't even know electric was off in Hayden Bridge, for example. That was one thing. And secondly, is the residents who were off had no communication with anybody really, and you know, obviously at the end, I managed to get it sorted out Northern Power Grid myself, but with the help of others. But it did take a long time, and the main concern is the information gathering, you know, and that needs to be improved. Now, I think if people know what's going on, they're often prepared to accept it. But when you've got a lot of elderly people and the concern of in the dark and all the rest of it, you know, it is a worrying time for them. And I think we could do more on that. So I'm hoping more is going to come out of this emergency committee, you know. Secondly, is on the mobile issue, I totally agree with Stephen, you know. What I'm wondering is that I've got areas, for example, you know, and we all have rural areas, perhaps on across Hadrian's Wall, all of Gilsland hasn't got any mobile coverage, because I'm told that, you know, because of Spade Adam and all the rest of it, you know, we can't get masts in that area to improve the mobile coverage. People haven't even got a telephone now put in the window upstairs and things like that. These are big, big issues, you know, for future issues like this. And I'm just wonder if our sort of team working on mobiles, which I agree with Stephen entirely on that, you know, that is a big bit of work I think we could do more on. And I'm just wondering if this can be made part of this report, that we need that as an action to do more and work. I'm not saying do more, maybe provide some money, because we've said we're going to provide money. But there's a lot of concern there about this issue, particularly in rural areas. So let's be honest, your area, my area, Sister Stephen's area, are those who are always going to be affected by problems with electricity and so forth.
Helen?
I think there's maybe there's a couple of 2 or 3 things there. One around MPG comms. at all the public meetings that they've run, they have acknowledged that it was their comms going down that caused a lot of the problems. They are telling us that they have invested heavily in their website, so their website shouldn't fall over in the same way that it did. And they are also investing within, just generally within communications and being more accurate in what they are telling people and not setting false expectations. It's difficult to hold them to account on that until we've necessarily experienced whether or not these improvements are actually robust enough. With regards to the council response to this and assistance to with door knocking, we were working in partnership with the we had staff out, our own staff out, we had fire service staff out, we had Mountain Rescue were assisting us and British Red Cross were assisting us with door knocking. Police, yes, thank you. So it was a multi-agency approach to this as well. Unfortunately, we were having to prioritise people within very badly affected, rural, isolated communities. But I do agree with you that kind of getting the information about what it looked like within individual communities can be improved, which is also part of the aim of the Community Resilience Project that we're working on, is to improve that two-way flow of information, because we were conscious that we were getting lots of information from some places and maybe not as much from others. And that it's difficult to know sometimes whether that's because they weren't affected or they couldn't tell us. So we do know that that's an area that we need to improve on. With regards to mobile telecommunications, what I will say is I'm not an expert on this. However, it's an incredibly complex area because you have the telecom providers. So there's 4 main telecom providers within the UK, all of which are Category 2 responders under the Civil Contingencies Act in the same way that Northern Powergrid is. And British Telecom, but they are also commercial organisations. And then I'm also learning that you have the commercial organisations that put the towers up, so they might not necessarily be the company that actually is providing the network. So when we were looking at this in the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, what became very apparent was it's very complex. Really there's something here about trying to understand what that looks like within rural communities and how we can influence that. And I don't have an answer for that as in my role, but it is a concern that I share.
And finally, Colin, I wasn't aware that was a workshop next week in the West, so could you give us the details of that, please?
That's one that I've organised with Councillor Morfitt for 2 of his parish councils.
Oh, so it's nothing to do with Colin and me. Right, that's what I was needed. Thank you very much. First of all, apologies, I have to go fairly soon. I've got another meeting. Can I just touch on, to sort of pick up the point about general communication? And I'm going to ask Helen if, following the simply deplorable actions of Powergrid in about a year ago now, isn't it? Which I saw on a regular basis when I went to West Hertford to see the continual poor communication, irresponsible promises that given out that were then changed without any notification to the others involved in the command, and then the appalling, simply appalling measures that they had in place for communication with us as county councillors, with the council as a whole, and also with residents. So given all of that, and given the effect it had on a lot of our residents, and on us, actually, as those councillors who had to deal with a whole range of emotions, from people desperate, annoyed, crying, we picked up an awful lot of that. And which is fine for me and fine for Stephen and others, I know, because that's our job. But are you then satisfied that Powergrid are now capable of communicating effectively, not just with us and not just with the command partners and not just with residents, but but across the piece. Are you satisfied that Power Grid have learnt the lessons and have made those significant changes that are needed?
That's a very big question. I can't hand on heart sit here and say yes, totally. I think partially would be my answer. I think they have improved their technology, which will assist. And if their website stays up and their website is providing accurate advice for people that people can access because they've got access to power and they've got access to the internet, then that will relieve some of the burden. But there is a massive assumption there that people can access the website. I think they have got, as an organisation, they have looked at their structures and how they would work with partners. I think they, in an emergency, yes, that will improve. I still think that they've got such a big patch that they need to work with, I think it's 7 local resilience forum areas. We all do it slightly different, so I think that's proving a challenge for them. But I think there is an element here of we should be working in partnership, and they shouldn't have to think that they need to fix everything themselves, or if they are going to put a solution in place in a response, they need to consult with us and make sure that the response that they're putting in place is suitable for Northumberland, because some of the welfare arrangements that they put in place worked in some areas but didn't work in others. Having said all that, I saw incremental improvements through all of the storms that we experienced last winter. So they were learning quite quickly last winter. If we ended up with something as large as Storm Arwen, would we all get it all right? I'm not sure we would. But I think, and again, it goes back to my earlier comment about they are giving communities reassurance that they've put improvements in place, but until those are properly tested, I think it's really difficult to say whether that all of that reassurance is actually 100% correct.
Can I just come back then with the question, what more can we as a council and councillors, not just the administration, but across the piece, what can we be doing to actually get them to focus on those areas that you're not satisfied they have fully implemented?
I actually think some of this is about the interconnected nature of power and how much we rely on power. If we've lost kilometres of overhead lines, for example, there's an element of being realistic about how quickly that's going to get replaced. So I know that the communities and some of the councillors have been holding them to account about their maintenance programme. So it would be good to know what's going on with their maintenance programme across the patch. And that includes tree cutting, making sure that the overhead lines are clear and are at less risk. But if we do lose power, how quickly is it going to be back on for people? And how do we make sure that our other utility providers are taking that into account? So Northumbrian Water lost power at some of their sites. So are we satisfied that they've got robust continuity plans in place? They've learnt as well, obviously, and they're saying that they have. It goes back to the earlier conversation about mobile comms, or actually household comms, in the event that people haven't got proper digital backup for digital lines. So there is some of this is also about the conversations that we've had a few times with Overview and Scrutiny Committee and the Task and Finish Group. It goes from personal preparedness at that household level, making sure that you are safe, to community resilience, but also about holding some of these organisations to account and making sure that they are actually working together so they understand the interconnected nature of their risks. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think probably what we need to do is to have some sort of a communication going out, and I'd be happy to share that with members of all parties, basically saying it's a year since this has happened, and have you done what you said you would do? And if it's certainly a way of tackling that. So I think if I talk to our comms people and ask them to put something out. It does worry me, though. You know, I'm sorry. Not many things really make me angry, but how they behaved then really does still make me angry.
I'm conscious, I was going to bring Stephen in, but I'm conscious that Glenn has to go, and I would like to actually ask Glenn something as the leader. There's two issues have come out of this, for me as chair of this. One is the fact that we've got 2 or 3 members on here today, and it could quite well be that in some sort of a climatic emergency, snowstorms, whatever, and the committee was called, some of the members couldn't get here. Now, Glenn, I think it would be a good idea if we had reserves, not to enlarge the committee, but just reserves if people couldn't show up. Now, whether we'll have to run that past Suki to make sure it's all legal or what, I don't know. But do you see what I'm saying? That it would be nice to have a committee that's got quite a geographical spread with members not turning up. And if some can't turn up, I think it'd be right to have reserves. That's one thing. So would you like to comment on that?
Can that be raised through DEM services? I would completely agree with that.
Right. And the other thing is that we are concentrating on R1 now. There's loads of other issues, but this is the R1 report. There's been another issue has been highlighted by Councillor Dodd, and that is the ash dieback situation. And I know it's early days. Helen, you went and visited Councillor Dodd and had a look at the problem. I believe there's possibly up to 6 million trees in Northumberland have to come down. A lot of those are not going to cause any problem, but the ones that's on the roadside next to electric lines could very well cause problems. So, Glenn, can you remember if this issue has been taken forward to a scrutiny meeting, or has it been looked at? It is, Helen, is it?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I might be able to answer that. Yeah, I've been in communication with colleague Greg Gavin. They are taking the woodland strategy to the overview and scrutiny, communities in place overview and scrutiny in January, and it will be part of the review as part of that strategy. It's going to be reviewed as part of that strategy as well.
Because, Glenn, do you think that is an issue?
That's what I suggested should happen.
Back to you.
Yeah, sorry. Just a few things that have obviously been said. The idea of reserves is great, but one of the things, as Helen knows, the bid that we're putting in Rothbury to make the community more resilient, the bid for the village hall in Rothbury, backup generation, we're also putting a camera conference system in as well. So if there is an issue in Rothbury, and as you mentioned earlier, you want to be on site, but you want to communicate with West Hertford, for instance, you'll be able to from Rothbury. And likewise, if this committee convenes at County Hall and I can't get because of snow or whatever, I can tap in electronically. So that's one of the things that we've looked at as well. Glenn's absolutely spot on, and likewise with yourself. We had 3 power cuts in my division last week. Whittingham was off, Netherton was off, and Elsdon was off. And all 3 communities were off because trees that were damaged during Storm Arwen or are resting on lines as a result of Storm Arwen and haven't been dealt with by Northern Power Grid knocked the power off to those communities in the winds that we got. So they need to, they need to get their helicopters in the air, their drones in the air, or start patrolling their lines. They need to start dealing with the outstanding tree damage that they've got. The other thing that I would mention, because I keep going back to communications, if you put aside the fact that we had no power, you put aside the fact that we had 12 water treatment facilities in Northumberland fail because Northumbrian Water weren't maintaining and testing their backup generators at those sites. The comms thing for me, it's obviously getting the message out, but in my area, because a lot of the actual telephone lines were knocked down and the mobile phones went down, the only way the residents I represent could access emergency services was carrier pigeon or smoke signal, because there was no other means. And that if someone is in an emergency, and that has ramifications. One of the small aspects, a lot of us will have defibrillators on village halls. I've got them in my area. There's a code you require for that defibrillator. You've got to ring the emergency services to get that code. So even the first line of response, if somebody has heart problems or something, you need to be able to access that. But the comms thing, and that's I'm a bit proud actually of the way planning are dealing with it. that we can take the Storm Arwen report and we can just say, right, we've done it, or we can actually, as an authority, start looking across the departments how we action and do things as a council, and planning's one of those, and planning have started to do that, so credit to Rob Murphy and his team, because the mass, for instance, in this area, in the Rossbury area, they said, oh, well, they initially said, in the event of a storm, we'll be able to source a backup generator put on site. That's not the case because none of them could do it during Storm Arwen, otherwise they would have done it. EE, great. EE's actually on all their new masts, they're putting backup generation and fuel storage on site so the generator can keep going for a long period of time and be topped up. The others are dragging their heels, but the O2 Virgin, thanks to Rob using some great planning techniques and negotiations, did it, but he said that's what he wants to look at for all the other areas where new masts come in, because you've got a very small window with masts. You've got 56 days to deal with that application, otherwise they get automatic approval. So that is so on-site backup generation and fuel storage for masts is a key thing to be able to maintain the mobile. And if you can maintain the mast, not just to access emergency services, you can maintain it to be able to get Northern Power Grid on your phone and get their website on the phone as well. If you don't have that, if the phone lines are down, broadband's down, if you don't have that, you're not getting that message either. But for the key thing for me is mobile telecoms in the event of, and the council, I'll say it again, the planning department are going about it the right way, which is great. And it's good to see that the departments within the council are taking the actions, and Helen as well, the actions coming out of Storm Arwen. And we can't do everything. We can challenge the companies who are responsible, but we do have a few tools available to us, one of them being planning, and the council's actually doing what it can to address the outcomes of Storm Arwen from that aspect. So it's a good thing, and you should be, proud of that.
Take those points to the board team. I think one of the real plus points that this council has is that apart from the tremendous community spirit amongst the population of Northumberland, our communities have got a team, our local services team, but we have a fire and rescue service part of this council. And Helen, I'm sure will want to come in here, where she came from authority that didn't have a fire and rescue service, and it is so easy for us. They're just there, they're with us, they're part of us. And I just wouldn't have taken this opportunity, Helen, to just, if you can give us the contrast between Northumberland and other authorities.
Certainly. So I came from a neighbouring urban authority whose fire and rescue service, don't get me wrong, is excellent, but is a separate organisation. If we had wanted to request mutual aid, it would have been a much more formal process to go through and request mutual aid. And they're very good at providing it if we needed it. But they aren't the same organisation, or they weren't the same organisation as us as a local authority. And as a local authority, we were very self-reliant as well. So having moved to Northumberland, and lots of people in the room will have heard me say this, but I was only in post 6 weeks when Storm Arwen happened. So I went into the incident support room at West Hertford, and sitting right next to me were senior fire officers from Northumberland Fire and Rescue Service. And the number of times they were asked, "Can you?" And the answer was yes. So knowing that resource was there, not only in the form of people and vehicles, but also buildings, because there were some communities where we actually used the community fire station to provide assistance for the community as well, because they were also resilient. So people were able to go in and access power and charge their mobile phones and things like that. It was just hand in glove working. And it was also interesting as well from that when in my profession, when you talk about multi-agency, quite often the trigger for declaring a major incident is if you are working in a multi-agency manner. Well, in Northumberland we always do, because we've got the county council and the fire service working hand in glove, because we are actually the same organisation, and so it's sometimes for people looking from the outside looking in, it can seem like we're getting on with things that maybe we should have declared as a major incident, but actually we're already working in that way because we've got the fire service sitting right next to us with their skills and their knowledge and all their resources as well. So that cross-council working, and I have to say the other departments that were in the incident support room as well, excellent support from our social care colleagues, adults and children social care, local services, and there will be others that I will not have mentioned, but just to, you know, the support that was there from across the whole organisation was absolutely central to how we did this. It's not about my team or the fire service, it's about the whole organisation responding, which is quite correct.
Yeah, because I remember, during the second down, I remember it was into the second week in the Allen Valley, south of Allendale, heading towards the Durham border. It was the weekend we actually had the army there as well. And the fire and rescue service were out. They were doing a multitude of different things. They were knocking on doors. They were delivering food. They were delivering logs. I was there with them one day when a call came in that somebody had gone off the road because there was sleet and slow at the time up there, and they went and were pulling people out of ditches. And I'm thinking, this is one pretty flexible organisation. And I've often said it in the meetings we have with the fire service that in the rural areas, it is very, very difficult to get an ambulance. You could wait 4+ hours. You can wait forever for the police to do something, and not because it's the police's fault, it's just so far stretched. But if you need a fire service, they're there within 5 minutes. And in the rural areas, the fire and rescue service is the #1 blue light service. Alan.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. The fire service in rural areas, we have a first-class operation in Holtwhistle, you know, and at all times, whether we've had flash floods or whatever, you know, they've been there within minutes to sort things out. My question is a little bit regarding the trees. I absolutely agree the trees are an issue, but Stephen made a comment that saying the trees are Northern Power Grid's responsibility to take the trees back and all the rest of it. What I would like to know is, I've got an estate, for example, where we've spent thousands on taking down dangerous roadside trees and all the rest of it. The landlords have a responsibility here as well. And if a tree has ash dieback and all the rest of it, a lot of these trees on the highway are actually not highway trees. They belong to the landlord who owns the land in the field. Now, I think that there needs to be more, I'm not saying the word enforcement, I may be using the wrong word here, but more knowledge of giving back to farmers and landowners where there's problems which could be identified now instead of being identified in 3 months' time, should there be a problem. And the fact Stephen's on about trees coming down, if they're not Northern Power Grid trees, and it's not their responsibility ultimately to take the trees down, what we need to be doing, and I think it could be our responsibility, I know we have a big problem in the tree department because we haven't got the resources at the County Council. Whose responsibility is to be going around checking these trees for ash dieback and the safety of trees on, because let's be honest with you, all the power lines normally run across the sides of the roads, and I reckon there'll be a lot of trees and all parts of them that need attention. This, to me, is a key bit of work, and I'm not sure who provides that. Have I explained myself properly here?
I think you've hit the nail on the head by saying that it's not straightforward. There's a number of players in this. So there's the landowner, there is ourselves, there's Forestry Commission, there's the utility companies. You know, we've got with a county as rural as Northumberland, with the amount of trees that we've got, I think it's quite a complex question, and it is something that I think I'm hoping that will be addressed in part of the woodland strategy, because those are the kind of questions that Councillor Dodd was asking with regards specifically to ash dieback. But it's not just about ash dieback, is it? It's about any trees that are become dangerous for whatever reason. The power companies do have responsibility to keep their lines clear. I think it's up to 10 metres. I think that's they should have a corridor of about 10 metres. But trees have a habit of growing. So keeping on top of that, I think, can be challenging. And they should have way leaves that allow them access to private land to be able to remove tree branches. But again, I think there can be issues sometimes with landowners allowing them access to their land for whatever reason. I don't know why. It's not my area of expertise, but I know that it's something that... And actually, there's also the whole urban tree issue as well. It's not just about rural areas, urban street trees and trees in people's gardens. So you can have individual householders that can have really big trees in their gardens that might need some maintenance, and the cost of that. And also, Storm Arwen demonstrated that the time it takes to clear up these trees, particularly when you've got really big areas impacted, it takes a long time because of the specialist skills and resources that are needed. So as you said, Stephen, there's still trees there that are damaged from Arwen that are still needing to be cleared up. That's nearly a year on, and we're moving into our next storm season.
Yeah, I mean, I had a meeting with Northumberland Estates last week, and one of them said to me 5 years for them to deal with all the damage by Storm Arwen. I mean, the estate's like 150,000 acres, I think Northumberland Estates is. They said 5 years, but the point I want to reinforce, because you've hit it bang on, Colin, is the fire service. And what you tend to find with the fire service is... particularly like the retained crews, the ones that are based in the communities are local people. They know the area like the back of their hand. So we had all these other resources coming in from the police and from everywhere else, which is great. But if you say to like the fire service lads, can you go and check this property? We've got an elderly person there. Bit of an obscure location. You say it to one of the local lads or lasses, they know exactly where you're talking about. They know exactly where to go. And actually, the Rossbury crew doing that when they were door knocking actually saved someone's life. There was a property further up the Coquet Valley where they were doing the door knocking. They went and knocked on this property. Something wasn't right. They explained it to us. Something just didn't feel right. The back door was slightly ajar. They went in, they found an elderly person on the floor who'd fallen in the darkness the day before. Hypothermia had set in, and they knew exactly what to do and took from there. If they hadn't gone and done that, she would have passed away because she couldn't move. She'd injured herself when she'd fallen. So the fire service, for me, just superb.
Before we leave the Arwen report, I mean, Ellen might want to say a few more words, but it was a county-wide emergency, and we were all affected in different ways. I think the county council's response, because I think it was the first time we had a county-wide emergency, I think the county council's response was pretty good. We did actually take a lot of stick from people. And I think that was really frustration when they wanted to give other organisations a bit of stick, but they couldn't contact them, so they just give us the stick. But we acted very... I think we did everything we possibly could. And, we just didn't have enough staff to go and visit all these rural areas. And I know I was going out and visiting people. I was coming back in at 10, 11 o'clock at night. But these Northumberland's a huge county, huge rural areas, and it's very, very difficult. It can take you half an hour sometimes to visit a remote cottage or farm, because you may have to go through 2 or 3 gates, and I'll know that very well. So I think by and large our response was pretty good. We also came into criticism saying Durham did things better. Well, from what I can gather, all of Northumberland was hit by Arwen, but not all of Durham was hit by Arwen, so they could sort of like concentrate their resources a bit better than we could. All sorts of things like the food vans and that. Everybody was crying out for food vans. I think Power Grid only had 2 or 3. Didn't they only have 2 or 3 food vans? And communities together were, Moore Taylor was excellent because I ran Moore one day when electric situation wasn't improving. And we got a van there within a few hours, and I think that was nothing to do with Power Grid. So I think that our response and our officers' response, bearing in mind our chief emergency person, planner type, was brand new to the authority, and so I think we did very well. So, Helen, would you like to round off the R1 report? Unless Liz?
Mate, bear with us because I just heard about this last week and this is not my forte type thing. And listening to where you all had problems, I live in Newbiggin and the biggest problems there was like fences and roofs because I lost quite a bit of my roof. But yeah, in a community chest meeting last week, there was a village, I think it was a village hall, whatever. They've got solar panels on the roof. And they came for money for a battery pack to store it. Could we not promote that?
So there are a lot of village halls who are working with Community Action Northumberland on their solar project. So it could be part of that. And they've had feasibility studies done on a number of buildings. But I do know that there are a number of village halls that are interested in solar anyway, because of the kind of cost of power, and this is a way of helping to reduce their bills. We have been working, so Northern Power Grid are offering grants to buildings who are willing to open in a response and help their community be resilient. So village halls and parish councils have been bidding into that. Community Action Northumberland are doing work in this field as well, but I don't know how much money they have availability outside of their feasibility studies. And Northumberland Communities Together are also doing work with community buildings as well and looking for sources of funding as well. So there's been a real cross-section of bids that have gone into Northern Power Grid. Some of the less technical ones are very much along the lines of we would like a generator that will power our building for X number of days. And we'll have fuel storage. Some are alternative heating sources, so getting bottled gas heaters. And some have been looking at those much bigger solar kind of solutions with battery backup. Now, if you think that Storm Arwen people were without power for 11 days, you'll struggle to find a battery that will give you 11 days battery backup. But it gives you that extra day, 2 days to get things up and running and possibly look for other resources as well. So there's a few different ways that people can actually try and source funding for this. Northern Power Grid in particular, while they are funding generators, they're not fans of diesel generators because of the carbon footprint. Solar gives you a much, different to that. Stephen's got his head in his hands. But we do need to think about innovation as well and the different sources of renewable energy that might be available for some of our buildings. As a council, I don't know what the policy would be on that, but it's certainly something that I think they do need to consider.
County Council's community chest scheme.
That's what they wanted. Through the community chest, that they might have got money elsewhere and they wanted to match fund it for the village hall.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But still, it was a big thing towards. I just wondered, could we not promote that we do this? Because there is a lot of money left in the community chest schemes. And
we'll have it in the north.
No.
I think, probably I'm going to say it would be great to be able to promote that if we can, because there's never enough money to pay for these kind of projects.
Yeah, well, I was just told yesterday, actually, by a member that they were struggling to find people who actually apply for community chest money in certain areas. Yeah, honestly. Yeah. So, right, Helen, give us a clue. What, we'll be talking about Arwen, which was a county-wide problem caused by a northern gale, which is almost unheard of, a northern gale. But there's so many different sorts of emergencies that, class as emergency. I mean, we had COVID, you could class that as an emergency. You got foot and mouth, you could class that as an emergency 20 years ago. You got a plane crash, a train crash, So what's the triggers for the committee? Is it solely down to you, or can a member of the committee request? We need a clue, you see.
I know you do. If you look at the Constitution, where the emergency committee is mentioned, it doesn't actually say what the committee is, what the trigger is for the committee. So I think there's a lot of flexibility there, Chair, for us to call it. But in all honesty, it probably should have been called for Storm Arwen. But as we've discussed in the past, all members were actually involved in the response to Storm Arwen. It can be called during an incident, or it can actually be called after an incident as well. So there is an element here of one of the things that we were talking about with regards to tree clearance. You start thinking about the recovery aspects of a major incident as well. So that is something that the committee could be involved in the conversations about how are we going to prioritise and think about recovery. So yeah, it's in the action card that I circulated prior to the meeting for discussion in the training session. It talks about it being convened by whoever is the post holder in my post, but it doesn't say in there that it can't be convened by anybody else. So
But the ultimate decision would be yours. Suppose Liz said, we've got an emergency, and I want the committee to get together.
I think it would be done. Let me just get the wording up so I'm not giving you poor advice.
I think, if I remember correctly, and you may remember this better than I, Colin, I think it was called during the big floods in 2008, Morpeth and Rothbury and other places as well. I think I remember it being called during then, and you're right. But I think the way we've got to approach it, and I'm not telling anyone how to do it, but the way we've got to approach it, all of the officers are represented and have inroads into the various organisations that are dealing with the response through the posts that they hold. But as elected representatives during an emergency, and 9 times out of 10, it's us that's getting the brunt. It's that they're coming to us first. We don't have a way of saying, if this committee meets, we need the Gold Commander, we need the Chief Fire Officer here. We need to be able to input and get that information back, if you see what I mean.
That's something I mentioned at the start of the meeting. Where do we meet? Because in an emergency, I want this committee to be seen as something positive. I don't want us to demanding that Paul Headley comes across here when he's busy there. So we've got to feed into what the experts are doing. So we've got to make this work.
You know, for the previous meetings we've had were all at West Hartford.
They were.
In 1980s, sorry, about 10 years ago or
Yeah.
whatever. They've always been at East Hartford. When we did the flooding issue, what Stephen's on about, we've met at East Hartford about 3 times, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. Yeah.
Getting back to it, we're obviously meeting in the council chamber today because this isn't an emergency committee. But if we are called during an emergency, I presume the best thing for us to do would be to convene at West Hartford in a room to the side of where the officers are working.
And those of us that can't make it could jump in.
So the wording that's taken from the Constitution is that the committee would be convened when called upon by the Civil Contingencies, Business Resilience and Emergency Planning Lead, which is currently me. So it is to me to convene the meeting.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah, but that's not to say I wouldn't, if a member called me and said, I think we should have a meeting, I wouldn't just say no. It would be a conversation, but also I can make the decision to convene that meeting as well. And the trigger is either before, during or after an emergency or major incident. So there is also, I suppose, an element of custom and practice here as well about how the committee when the committee wants to meet. Does it want to meet early? Does it want to meet after? So there's, I would imagine that I would probably be speaking to you as the chair as well, Colin, to say this is the situation. So I would convene it, but it would be done in consultation.
I think that with hindsight, perhaps we should have the emergency committee should have met after Arwen. I know that the scrutiny people had to do their work, but perhaps a meeting then. But I'm still of the opinion we couldn't have met during Arwen. We just couldn't, even though, you know, I took a lot of stick locally. There's some people that had done some research and found the county had an emergency committee. The emergency committee getting together during Arwen wouldn't make any difference.
There's also provision for a member of the emergency committee to come to the incident support room as well. So that's also something else that we can would be a conversation about whether or not there'd be it would be appropriate to have somebody in the incident support room. And I know Glenn did come, but he came as the leader rather than necessarily. And he so there's that. And the card also talks about regular briefings, making sure that you are getting information during the incident as well, in lieu of possibly meeting.
Can I just jump in? If I've got flooding, if I've got major snowstorm, if I've got exploding cranes, if I've got biggest manhunt in British history, if I've got whatever, no water, no gas, I don't, like in the area that I represent, I think it's important that I'm there in the area that I represent. And if it's a Northumberland-wide thing as well, I don't see the need for me to be in the control room at West Hertford. I think I can do more on the ground at home kind of thing. But if it is a case of the committee needs to meet during an incident to basically for the benefit of all elected representatives, because there might be one day it might be such a severe emergency we need to communicate that we may have a member of the army leading the response. It might be that significant kind of thing. We are still accountable. We're the conduit between the residents and the authorities higher up. So, I mean, if that's why we're like in Rothbury, we're putting that in place. So if the committee does meet at West Hertford, say, but I can jump out of whatever I'm doing at home for an hour and into the meeting electronically, so I can be part of that. But I think I support what Colin says there. I mean, there would be no reason for me to go to the incident control room. There would be for Colin as chair of the committee, for instance, but not for me unless the committee needed to specifically meet for a reason.
I think in my position as portfolio holder for community services, it automatically makes me the chair of the fire authority. So I would expect to be in there anyway, because I have massive contact with the fire service every day. So, and that's not me, it's just in my position. So if I was to move on from this position, it would be somebody else. But that position is firmly encamped into West Hertford. So Helen's got the emergency. This is something we organised earlier.
Hello. Oh, can I ring you back? I'm just in a committee meeting. Wasn't. I do apologise. I thought it might be about the exercise that's happening at the moment.
Yeah. So, right, that's it. We've covered the Arwen report. Now, I'm going to slightly alter the agenda here, and I'm going to go straight on to urgent business. I haven't been alerted by any urgent business. So, right. So now we're going to go on to the FloodX national exercise, which is going to happen after we close the meeting.
Adjourn the meeting. We adjourn the meeting so that we can convene it without having to. It's always adjourned.
It's adjourned. Right, we adjourn the meeting. Right. So,
Are we going to part 2 now?
yes,
Yes.
I'm going to look for the wording. Is it agreed that we exclude the members of the press and public? Agreed. Right, okay. So now,